Let's look a little bit at curriculum. I've heard a lot of different things about different people, and there are some people who say that you shouldn't use a curriculum. Is it really that complicated to choose a curriculum or not to choose one?
You're going to find out there. So when I was first homeschooled, we were very limited in what was available to homeschoolers. There wasn't an internet yet. That's how old I am. And at that time, curriculum sellers did not really look at homeschoolers as being a viable market. So there were basically two companies that were selling curriculum to homeschoolers. Nowadays, everybody realizes that there's money to be made, and there's this thing called the internet. And so between all that, you can get massive decision fatigue. So, again, decide what you want your homeschool to accomplish, and then somebody out there has written something that you could just try and plug and play, but then you'll realize that, hey, my child moves a lot faster than this curriculum, and you can go through grade 3 of their math a lot faster than you're going through grade 3 of their reading and grammar. So you will be constantly adapting, because every curriculum out there is written for some common group, and your child is not that. Every curriculum is written for an average, and your child's not average. Whatever they are, your child is not the middle. And so you have to just assume that as I set up the materials that I'm going to put in front of my child, that I'm going to have to change and adapt, and that what works for this child in grade 2 may not work for my next child in grade 2. Or maybe both my children are going to be doing the same thing at the same time. But it's a feature, not a bug, of homeschooling, that you get to be adaptable. Just be prepared that you're going to have to be making some of those decisions, and that, hey, you may try something and it may not work, and you can change it, and you don't have to go with a government standard for the rest of the year, because that's what we all paid money for.
Yeah, and I think there's different approaches and thoughts about curriculum. I mean, one of the things that, when we first start homeschooling, one of the things that curriculum does for you is it gives you structure. There are curriculums that kind of basically they spell out how you're going to approach every subject. They tie things together. They give you tests. And that can be really useful at times. The other part is they also constrain you in the sense that they think about things in this exact way. It's very structured, and it may not be structured in a way that's useful for you. So when we started homeschooling, I forced my wife and I to not use a specific curriculum, but to kind of use different curriculums and pick different things. And the goal was always, it's kind of like when you look at a textbook. A textbook has information on a subject, but the subject, it's abbreviated, it's very structured, it's kind of written for tests, it's geared to give you this specific information. And so the idea was I wanted the kids to do more reading a book and learning things, and we would test them. But that is harder, and it takes more work. And so it is one of those things where in the beginning you might find a curriculum useful, but if you start that way and you think that's all you can do, you can also find yourself being very limited by it as you go. So I think it's one of those things where you're going to adapt as you go, and kind of keep an open mind and keep looking at what you really want to achieve. And as you become more comfortable with it, you'll probably find curriculum, I can't say probably. I know a lot of people who find curriculums more constraining as they go and decide to kind of use a more eclectic approach.
The other thing that I would say about that is every subject doesn't need to be a curriculum either. We use curriculum for some subjects. Some other subjects we didn't use curriculum for. Some we use college curriculum rather than even when my children were very young. Some of the things it makes sense to use college curriculum. If you want them to become an expert at something, if there's an area where you say this is where their gifting is, this is where their strengths are, you don't want to use much curriculum, because the reality is, as Jonathan said, curriculum teaches to the average. Nobody becomes exceptional by going through a high school curriculum. If you want them to understand history, you have them read real books that are written by people that are trying to explain real things. History books that are in curriculum are terrible at that. The people don't care. They don't have any interest. They're trying to produce a book to sell to schools. If you instead find somebody that's really interested in the subject, you'll find a lot more information. You'll learn how to think about the situation. You can compare books. Nobody becomes an expert through curriculum. So when you see a child that has a certain area, I would argue that in that area, you don't really want to be using curriculum, or all you'll do is keep them average, and that's not how they excel.
One thing to add on before we go on to other questions is when the question gets asked, if you have a specific follow-up to that, if you want to text that to the number provided, if Roger gets a text from that to that number we provided for it, he can kind of give Connor an audible and say, hey, there's a follow-up question.
Or raise your hand if you're here.
If you're in the yes.
We have a mic, I believe.
That we can have somebody run a mic out to you and to ask a follow-up question. So just make sure we're getting the answers to the questions you want.
Thank you. In general, how much do you expect to spend per year on curriculum per child?
I'm not going to answer that one. I'm way too out of date.
Well, if you have 9 children, probably with a 9th child, probably nothing.
Right. I don't know that I could give you a good answer. I mean, what we tended to do is, I'm a functional cheapskate, so I always looked for used, I looked for used books. If I was looking, and this is one of the things where, for certain subjects, the difference between 2 different curriculums sometimes isn't that extreme. There are basic things that you're looking for someone to give you a bunch of math tests. The difference between a bunch of basic math tests aren't that fundamentally different. And like when you get into vocabulary and different things like that, there are lots of free resources. So if you're willing to print things out yourself, if you're willing to buy used, you can get a lot of things for a very good price. As you get into older categories, and like I said, as you're starting to look for books, there are sometimes books that are more expensive. So I can't give you a specific, it is a little bit, it's in your hands. If you have a good library system in your area, there's so many resources available, both on the internet, through libraries. You can do a lot of things to cut out cost. And so I typically would have considered myself as not being on the high end of being, having a lot of extra money to spend on things. And we were never particularly constrained in being able to find the curriculum we needed or acquire it.
Give a ballpark, though, Charles. People want precise. Just give some kind of number.
I really,
$1,000 a year?
No, I wouldn't say. It's somewhere between $200 and $500. $100 to $500
Per child?
No, I meant like per year. Because this is with 9 kids, because over time we were always acquiring new material for the next child. And so it was kind of like hand-me-downs, we weren't buying new stuff for the older kids. Occasionally we would find something that we needed to supplement for them. But it's probably on the order of a couple $100 to $500 a year. And you can spend a lot more. You can always spend a lot more.
And the reality is, with the internet, you can also spend less if you really need to.
And that's what I'm saying. I think there were years where we didn't have a lot of extra money, and we got a printer, we paid for paper and ink, and we printed a lot of stuff off the internet some years, and so that was our total cost.
All right, thank you. Sorry, yes.
So there may not be tax breaks for that, but there a lot of the material that if you are a registered homeschool, you can get discounts on the purchase of the material. So definitely explore that.
And if you have, if some of you are still looking for things afterwards, if you want to send an email to the events at reformationbaptistchurch.com asking some questions, well, there are things like there are homeschool buyers co-ops. There are, there are groups that are constantly saying, hey, here would be a great thing we could buy if we get 50 people to say they'll buy it. We can get this price. So almost sort of like Kickstarter, where you pledge, I'll be willing to buy that at this price point. And then once they get enough people, they buy that and they get that deal. So there's lots of things like that, and lots of groups where people work together to acquire resources, and local homeschool groups. But the internet has made a lot of cooperation like that possible.
Question, are there any curriculums for ages 1 to 4?
I think we could try to give, I think I'd rather go back and give a specific, I don't remember one curriculum we were crazy about. When you get to manipulatives, I think it depends on the child. I think there are, there were the ones that had like the little individual blocks for math, or the different, where you had like groups of things for math. Some children found those really useful. Other children, they didn't touch them. They just played with them. They were basically Legos as far as they were concerned. And so it gets really, really, really specific to your child and looking at how your child learns things.
We've used the book Teach Your Child to Read in 100 Easy Lessons. I know other people have used that as well. And I think we've liked that. I'm sure there's a lot of other options as well.
One thing that I'll say with manipulatives, and we think of manipulatives like you're talking about, but the reality is Legos are really important manipulative. Duplos are really important manipulative. These are things that And I would just encourage people when they think about curriculum, think about, hey, go build a house with one and give them that instruction and let them go figure out how to put the things together. And this is a really significant part of learning that public schools are pretty lousy at, because they want to structure everything as opposed to letting your children figure it out. And there's so many things that are out there that are games that are trying to give all kinds of details of, like the new Lego sets that have all this, stuff on them. There's some real advantages to just the old little blocks that were bricks that they went and built something with. Those are important manipulatives, and those are important things for early grades to learn and to do with, so that they actually think about how things go together and how the world works.
I mean, this isn't about curriculum, but it's just tacking on to Dan's ideas. One of the fundamental things about homeschooling that I've found the most useful is, if you look around you, the people who are usually the most capable and the people who usually are able to deal with things in the world are people who can solve problems on their own. And that's kind of what he's talking about there is
Start early.
Right. And so so I mean, if I'm going back to the heart of resetting the way you think about education, one of the things that you do there is you try to teach your children to solve problems themselves. When my kids come to me with a math problem and they say, I'm having problems with this, I've asked some of them, I go, what do I usually do? He goes, you make us read it in front of you. And then you say, what does that say? And a lot of times, part of it is my goal is to drag this out, and I go, next time, before you come to me, you read it, because you can do exactly what I did, because I didn't give you any extra information. And they'll come and say, I don't know how to do this problem. I'm like, did you look at the example? There's an example. There's always an example. Oh, and so there's just part of it where your child is doing what people do in the world is they try to get out of solving a problem. And just like at work, sometimes there's a guy who knows how to do things. And I'm not saying it's wrong to do this. You call him because he knows how to do it. In school, you're that guy. And so your kids come to you because they know you know how to do it. And they're going to do everything they can to trick you into telling them how to do it so they don't have to figure it out themselves. And so part of education is forcing them to realize you're not going to solve the problem for them. And sometimes as a parent, it's gratifying to solve a problem for them. There have been times where I found myself solving their problems and enjoying the feeling I got from it and going, wait a minute, I'm being a horrible parent and teacher. And so you have to kind of remember that. So, I mean, this isn't about curriculum, but it is about just thinking about how these things work.
So one of the things that when I was growing up, we played a lot of games together as a family, card games, board games, dominoes. And I just thought we were playing games together until I was old. I've got brothers who are significantly younger than me, and we were playing cards one day, and one of my younger brothers is sorting the cards in his hand, and my mom leans over to me and says, hey, look, he's learning number sequence. So you think that you have to put everything into this educational and academic box where we're sitting at school, a school desk, and there's a blackboard up there, and that's how our children learn. And that's just not true. And so, I mean, hey, with our children now, we play lots of games together because that's how they learn number sequence, critical thinking skills, strategy, arithmetic. My 4-year-old is learning arithmetic. He knows some of his math facts because he plays games with his other kids, just goofing off, and they just absorb things like that. So really, that playing games, playing Legos, these things are all sorts of things where your children are learning critical life skills, and you're having fun while doing it. And those are really valuable things to be doing with your especially with your younger children. But hey, it works for the older kids too.
At the risk of drifting off topic way too far, but I mean, the one warning I will give is this: I would stay away from video games. And like I said, the games he's talking about are, games like, card games, things like dominoes, things like that. No, but video games give you a false sense of accomplishment. And I can tell you, you can do, obviously do whatever you want to. They're your children and it's your responsibility. But I can tell you that my attitude has been, when I look at the damage that video games caused to me in my life and how much of my time I sunk into enjoying the satisfaction I got from this fake sense of progress. And I mean, it to the point where it damaged my marriage when I got married. I tell my kids, you're not allowed, when you grow up and you're paying for your time, you can play all the games you want. For right now, I pay for your food, I pay for your time belongs to me, you're going to do something more useful. We've got a few kids that are, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old. We'll let them Minecraft. We'll let them play it every once in a while, maybe an hour. It's sort of like it's close to digital Legos, And I'm still a little iffy about, it's maybe we're going to cut that out because I see it's so much easier to build something there than it is in another scenario, and that's part of it. Is it makes the complexity of the world is hard. Games are easy. And when you find it, your brain gives you pleasure when you succeed at something. And a game is an easy way to do that. And so I would just strongly encourage you, massively limit or cut out video games. There is very little usefulness there except for teaching them to gain value from simple things.
Going along with the curriculum, are there ways to test a curriculum out before buying it?
There are things you can download. So sometimes curriculums will have sections you can download for free. And there are, and so, I think it depends on, once you've played around with once you've used a few of them, and it is one of those things where you literally kind of think through, how would I teach this? How would I use this? I think a lot of times you can look at the sample chapters and get a feel for how you would end up using it in reality. In the beginning, it's really daunting because there's a part of it where you just look at it and you go, I'm not sure what I'm doing yet. And I think there's just a natural learning curve that starts to happen. But I think there's a part of it where you really want to think, you need to have a plan for your day. You need to have a plan for what you're going to do. And you drive that. And then you pick a curriculum that helps you do that. What can be really bad is when you pick a curriculum and the curriculum makes you change your life to suit the curriculum. That causes you great frustration.
And there, I know near us, there's homeschool resource stores where you can actually get hands on the book and look through it. And with homeschool groups, I'm sure they have things where you can look at other people's curriculum and get an idea of what there is. I mean, of course, before everything was canceled, there were homeschool conferences where you can go to the vendor hall and there you could spend, the entire homeschool conference looking at everything. They have a ton of stuff where you can actually see the curriculum.
The other thing that I'd say is when you're looking at curriculum, they're your children. Look at what you think would have worked for you when you were their age, because it is going to vary. There's different curriculum because there's lots of different children that learn in different ways, and it's very valuable. And again, they're not copies of you, but they are related to you, and they have the same priority, or you've taught them priorities. You've given them, your genes. So in all that, so part of when you evaluate a curriculum, you also go, would this have worked for me at that age?
Right. And the old adage is true. The kid who drives you the most crazy is usually the most like you. I mean, it. Yes, when you look in the mirror, it can be really painful.